Hi all, I had a very interesting game last night against a very strong player who I quite fear and respect, Robert Eames. He's a FIDE master. He's done very well in many tournaments throughout his chess career, often winning the South End Open tournament. So I was playing with the black pieces. He kicked off with e4. I played the Caro-Kann defense. He went into the main line, so knight c3 is like the main line. By the way, on live book, knight d2 is much rarer. This sequence, for those interested, but I think it leads to the same thing. Black's just taking here. We've got the same position. So knight c3 or knight d2, it doesn't matter. Just a little bit of trivia there. So knight takes. Bishop f5 is the main line. Other things I thought a bit too risky. I didn't want to have double pawns here. I know you can take like this or this, or you can try and play solidly with knight d7. But bishop f5 is like the main line. So we're following this main line of the Caro-Kann, very topical. So black's accepting less space. All the pieces on the first 3 ranks here. There's a Caro-Kann video, if you remember, on the channel. We might want to review it. But in exchange for that, black's pretty solid here without the problem bishop. So play continues like this: queen c7, and knight e4 was played, which is the main move here. The knight is being exchanged off here for this one, and if the queen comes to e4, then there's things like bishop f4. I castled here. I didn't want to help white particularly. If I played knight takes e4, it kind of helps white, because then we have immediate things like bishop f4. So I actually played just castling, and now g3 was played, which is again the main move. So even up to move 14, we're in mainline territory. Takes, and bishop d6. This has all been seen before. Still over 300 games in this position. c4, very topical. c5, because otherwise c5 and bishop f4, and it's going to be nasty on that diagonal. So everything's going okay to start. I mean, from this start position, d5 has been seen before here apparently. d5 with continuations like this apparently. So this is supposed to be equalish, but he didn't play d5. Played actually king b1, and this is much more aggressive intentions of things like rook c1 and maybe b4 later to force through c5 to kick this bishop, to play bishop f4. Especially if I'm prompted for this, my queen will be on this diagonal, so if he kicks this bishop there'll be a skewer. I did play king b8. This might not be the best move. So it's interesting tactically already if b4 works or not. It's nearly getting dangerous for b4. I was looking at it already here. I was thinking maybe it might be okay. But usually knight f6 is played in this position, so I've kind of veered off. And here, this position, queen c6, this looks as though with queen e4 in mind, it looks pretty logical as well. That covers e4. This looks like a reasonable position. There's been a few games on this position. It seems to be equalish. But yeah, king b8, slightly risky, perhaps. You might not think it, but it's on that diagonal, with white having played g3, you know, ready for if we can get the bishop off this diagonal. But we have rook c1, and yeah, I'm thinking b4, because now this is surely a dangerous idea with c5 later and even c6. So I release the tension and try and accept the consequences immediately. White's threatening knight b5 now. So I kick his queen though, and the queen goes back to e2. I'm not entirely sure that this is that good for white. This position, it's interesting. He's kind of virtually sacrificing a pawn, but I think it's probably a little bit ambitious. In fact, so okay, a6. Now definitely this is a little bit ambitious. b4 was played here, and the game takes a very, very tactical turn. The point of b4 here, I mean, it does seem very logical. You know, c5, kick the bishop, bishop f4. There's a great, beautiful logic. The rook supporting the c pawn here. But you know, knight a4. I thought this is interesting. Knight a4. This is a potentially dangerous knight, and there's things like bishop e5 on the cards. c5. Now here, I thought maybe better than bishop e5 because there's knight f3. If bishop e5, knight f3, and this is annoying, I thought, you know, bishop f6, you know, bishop f4. But then I thought, hold on a sec, why not bishop takes g3? And lo and behold, you know, when I did some engine analysis earlier, you know, black's actually slightly better with this move in this position. It is pretty interesting idea. And I was very sort of proud of the move at the time of the game because it seems to be walking into bishop f4s, but you know, if takes, there's far too much compensation here surely for black. After bishop f4 I take here and I just sack the exchange. I don't know where we want to move the king. We can't move it there because of rook b2 check, so I just sack the exchange, and I thought this is just far too dangerous for white, you know, queen f6 on the cards. I was looking forward to that. But unfortunately, unfortunately, in this position, g takes wasn't played. Bishop e3, so things started to catch me a bit by surprise. And actually, I do immediately technically blunder here, a bit of a howler. Now, I have created two liabilities actually. Well, there are two imminent liabilities in the position. One is definitely my cause of liability, this loose knight, but the other is the opponent's strength, kind of based on the opponent's strength, c6. And my initial theory about this game, and I was trying to sort of visualize where I could have improved things. I had a suspicion here. Well, during the game, I was wondering about either bishop e5 or queen e5, and I was lured into the time of the game last night. Queen e5 seemed mega attractive because it has this idea of rook takes d4 and queen e4 check, and sometimes the rook's loose in variations. And then I can put the bishop back on e5 and I'll be covering these diagonals, and it seemed really glamorous to play queen e5. In the cold light of engine analysis, queen e5 is actually immediately refuted. White has a move here to immediately refute this, but I mean, my calculations were very optimistic that I'd take here, takes, and if bishop f4, so if rook takes, there's queen takes, I play this. And I'm winning here because of this check. You know, I can play this check. I can win the opponent's queen with check. And so that's one example where I thought this is so attractive, this move, queen e5. But there's actually the philosophy I thought about this game, and it's only a brief philosophy. Why? I mean, it's easy when you see, you know, the engine moves how to refute white's position. You might think it should be refutable, right? Because there's weaknesses around the king. I've won a pawn. I'm a pawn up. And also this knight looks a bit loose. It should be refutable, you'd think. But the philosophical thought I had that to actually prove a downside in white's position, I basically need to cover everything. This is an expression I've heard recently from a very strong player about covering everything. And I'm wondering here, at the moment, there's a virtual blockade on the pawn. It's not an immediate blockade, like the queen's not, a piece isn't blockading this pawn, but this is a loose knight. These two factors are things to cover, really. So the queen's actually quite useful on c7, just in principle, because you imagine if the pawn's there, it's actually threatening c7 check, potentially winning material, potentially. And this knight is a potential liability at the same time to things like queen c2 to gain a tempo. So I've got two actual liabilities. Now, I have actually won a pawn here, so if I can cover these two liabilities, the passed pawn and the loose knight, I should be able to prove downsides. I mean, that's the philosophy that I think is interesting. It just came into my head over the night. So about covering everything, it's not too easy at the moment to cover it. You can't exactly if b5, you know, maybe there's en passant and discover attacks. So I can't cover this knight. It's kind of stranded. It's on the rim. Knight on the rim is dim. But can it be covered in theory, or can I get a counter attack on e5? So Queen e5, yes. I thought Queen e5 was really good in many variations. Queen c2, Rook takes d4, and now I thought this is troublesome for White. Say takes here, then check, ouch, because then b4's dropping later. So yeah, I was really, that's why I was really magnetized to this move. But if I'm only thinking, how can I change my thought process about this move? I mean, basically, it's very glamorous looking. That it creates all these potential checks on the king and the bishop coming to e5. But if we look in terms of trying to cover everything, in particular the two issues, then maybe more emphasis can be put on keeping this virtual blockade. The queen's actually quite good on c7 in its own right, because against c6 there's always b5, and if you think about that position, as long as there isn't a smash with knight takes b5, then the pawn's blockaded by the queen automatically. So this kind of unblockades the pawn really. So I've actually created basically two liabilities here, the c pawn and the a knight. But there's an immediate refutation. My opponent doesn't have to take here, doesn't have to play queen c2 or other stuff particularly. There's an immediate refutation which the engine finds immediately, of course, in like a millionth of a second. Can you see what White can play here to just have a clear advantage? If I give you 5 seconds, starting from now. Okay, just queen g4 actually. It protects the knight, and it also, this bishop's trapped. That's pretty nasty. Queen g4. Yeah, there's not really much to say about that, apart from it's like losing a piece. So that's why immediately queen e5 is actually refutable. And my opponent, I mean, didn't see that. I mean, he's not a computer. He actually played a different move here. Okay, what did he play? So he played actually queen d3. This is the move played. Now, before going on from this position, I mean, this is actually now dangerous for black. I haven't covered the a knight, and I haven't covered the c pawn, and in fact c7 coming up is going to be very strong, supported by the rook. So basically, I've completely justified actually, in effect, the rook on c1. I haven't covered any liabilities, and I was chasing this check, which was covered by my opponent's queen d3 and other stuff. He's covered the knight on d4 and the checking diagonal, and by covering that he's exposed my liabilities. So the basic philosophical mechanism there is, if you cover everything, your issues, you can prove the opponent's downsides, and he's actually proving the downsides of my position by covering this key diagonal and the knight. But maybe, by the same token, it seems that bishop e5 is better for black in many variations here. For example, rook hd1, and a key move would be now rook d5. And you'll notice in this position that I can react to c6 with something like even this rook hd8, more to the point, to put pressure on d4, or even maybe b5, and that will be covering the knight, and also the c pawn's covered. So by covering the two issues here, kind of proving the opponent has downsides. So there's a basic mechanism there. If you can cover your issues, you can start to prove the opponent's downsides. It's logical, but I didn't. This position is tricky after rook d5, it seems. So say here, I don't know why I had that variation in with rook e8. No, just rook hd8 or b5, key moves here, and it looks as though White's in a bit of trouble. For example, if c takes, then knight c3 check, the knight justifies itself. Rook takes, queen takes. Here I can pick up this pawn, and it's all pretty nice. Yeah, it's all pretty winning really. There's Yeah, so yes, it's really sad that this seemingly logical, sensible move, it had occurred to me, but I was then magnetised to Queen E5. It seems, yeah, the Queen's actually virtually blockading the pawn in its current location. Assuming the pawn's coming to C6, then we've got a blockade, and also ready for B5. But yeah, the game is kind of a disaster after this. Queen D3, Bishop F4, and now C6 is already unthreatened with C7, so I haven't covered my liabilities. And not only that, my opponent's going to use the loose knight now to get a winning position. So C takes. This is really dangerous now for A6 and for just doubling rooks, and white's just becoming a lot better here. Rook B5. Okay, the knight's pinned to B2 for the moment, but just A3, so the knight's just looking stranded. Although if we look at this position with rook C6, there was an opportunity here for Queen F5 to get the queens off, and this might have been okay tactically. To accept this position is apparently equalish, so that was another missed opportunity really. It's a bit sad. So rook B5, I was starting to be in time pressure a little bit. It was a 10-second increment, but all moves in 120 minutes, not 120 minutes, 80. So A3, I take on E3, and I have to play now. There's only one move to try and stay in the game, which is knight C5, and I didn't play this. I don't know where I was last night. It's like really a bit odd. Didn't see this sort of stuff. I mean, it was actually becoming quite critical, because white's on the verge now of doubling and maybe trebling, using the knight on A4 as a tempo gain to crash through. So this is a pretty critical position before the doubling. It seems, sorry, in this position, it's pretty critical here to play knight C5. It seems if Queen C2, I'm going to take here. This position might actually be okay. It's very scary stuff, but it might actually be okay. Technically, yeah. But no, I kind of mess up. I play this, which is just hopeless. It just doubles, and I've got issues here. I'll try and address them with rook B6, and now the trebling and using the knight on A4. So you see that C file and the loose knight have been totally exploited. They weren't issues that I covered up from earlier. Completely exploited here, and I'm busted really. I'm actually busted. If I played something like rook D7, instead here, rook D7, you see that Queen C2 double attack on A4 and C7. So it's like this. This is now crushing with rook takes B6, and white's crashing through. So yeah, I've left these liabilities, that C file and the loose knight, and they're there to punish me now. Those liabilities. So if I had tried to cover them up, I desperately do this to try and get the queens off. It doesn't help. I'm just exchange down. It's completely lost. White just took here and just won pretty soon after. So yeah, I mean, I thought, yeah, it seemed so lucrative though last night. I was just calculating, but maybe instead of that, just a pawn up, if I could just cover my issues as the top priority, the A4 knight and the C pawn, that's the basic philosophy. Cover the issues, all of the issues, then maybe look forward to something. But here I'm not. With Queen E5, it's a decision not to cover the issues of the C pawn and the knight, and I was duly punished for that. So I guess there's a lesson here, trying to be too resourceful, too attacking when you've got issues. You might have already won a pawn even, like in this example. There's no need for Queen E5. The funny thing is, yeah, Queen E5 is actually immediately refuted with Queen G4, which was missed. That's a really horrible move, defending everything, and the bishop's trapped on G3. So yeah, it's a bit, I don't know, it's silly looking, this game, but during the game I was just so compelled to play Queen E5. I just thought it was so lucrative in these variations with Rook D4 and laying the bishop F4. I thought this was missed, and yeah, but the liabilities are based on all of my opponents playing, you know, getting the rook to c1, the c pawn, the running c pawn. So yeah, the queen can be looked as a kind of virtual blockader, even though it's 2 squares away from literal blockade. The knight needs b5 if possible to stabilise it. We'll try and get back later. Now, there's variations in the PGM which go beyond what I've shown you. For example, in Queen E5, Queen E5, I've got something like Queen C4 here on move 25. I don't know how I arrive at that. There's variations in the PGM. This position, I don't know how this was arrived at. Queen C4 here. Alright, in variations where I'm playing bishop E5, rook HD1, rook D5, Queen C4, you see that this position looks pretty critical, yeah, because I've still got the loose knight on A4, but it can be handled, it seems. You know, rook HD8 here, King A8, and if ever C6, then there's always B5. So that's why the C pawn and the A knight can, it seems, be handled. But yeah, I wasn't into covering up the issues for some reason. I played Queen E5 as an aggressive move, but I think the art of war. I think this is something I mentioned in many videos when looking at master games. Put yourself beyond defeat before going on to the attack is a principle I've echoed several times. Maybe that's the same sort of thing here. If you cover up all your issues first, then you're in a better position to start attacking. But here it's already kind of covering the c pawn. It's just the knight needs b5 in response to c6. But yeah, these things are of course fantastically easy to say in retrospect. But at the time, yeah, Queen e5 were just so lucrative. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.